Simon opened his eyes and stretched, a habitual morning ritual. He had made it a rule to wake up early several years ago, turning it into a mandatory part of his daily routine. His life was governed by a set of unchanging rules. First, there was the obligatory morning exercise, not particularly strenuous or lengthy, but better than nothing. Second, a contrast shower. Although he hadn't yet mustered the courage to switch instantly from scalding hot to icy cold water, he tried his best and always felt invigorated afterward. Third, he made sure to have breakfast in a calm, unhurried manner, avoiding the rush of eating on the go. The meal had to consist of proper dishes and ingredients. After all, we are what we eat. This saying had struck a chord with Simon. He didn't want to resemble a poorly cooked omelette or burnt porridge. So he took his breakfast preparation seriously, especially now that he had to do it himself. After breakfast, he would return to the bathroom to wash up, shave meticulously, and brush his teeth thoroughly. He took pride in his appearance, even though he wouldn't admit it to anyone. While some might say that men don't care about their looks, Simon believed that those who had nothing worth looking at could afford such indifference. He, on the other hand, was blessed with good looks and intended to maintain them for as long as possible. Women, after all, spent a considerable amount of time enhancing their appearance, and no one considered it a waste of time. Yet if a man lingered in front of the mirror, he was often ridiculed and accused of lacking masculinity. Indeed, even Kelly, as he recalled, had been patient with his habit of lingering in the bathroom, even if she did giggle about it. And truthfully, he had never had any issues with breakfast back then, and truth be told, he had never tasted better pancakes than those she made. Catching himself reminiscing about her, he frowned in annoyance. He had promised himself to forget her after yesterday's events, but here he was, thinking about her again. Determined, Simon got up and began his morning routine, trying to convince himself that this day was no different from any other. For a while he succeeded, but soon he found himself irritably tossing a pan of overcooked eggs into the sink and sitting down on a stool. What was the point of pretending everything was fine? Nothing was fine. The forgotten exercise, the 2 nicks on his chin from shaving, the burnt omelette, and the sudden urge to smoke. All these were signs that something was amiss. He hadn't experienced any of this in a long time. Clearly his state of mind was far from normal. Had yesterday's events affected him so deeply? He listened to his inner self and gave a definitive answer. Yes. It had not only affected him, but also shocked, outraged and confused him, even frightening him a little. Yesterday had completely thrown him off balance. What made it even more surprising was that he hadn't anticipated such an outcome. When he called and arranged to meet her, he expected a different reaction. He thought Kelly might not be overjoyed, but at least she would respond reasonably. They would sit down, have a calm conversation, discuss everything, and make a sensible decision together. It hadn't been easy for him to take this step, to visit his ex-wife after 3 years of separation, and to say what he had said. He was even prepared to take some of the blame for their breakup and admit that he hadn't been entirely right. Yes, he was ready for a lot, and expected at least some understanding in return. But what did he get? Mockery and blatant, unmasked, cynical indifference. He was like a fool with a huge bouquet of roses that he had so carefully chosen in the store, trying not to think about the outrageous price, and desperately trying to remember what kind of flowers Kelly liked. Truth be told, he had never been good with flowers, neither choosing them, giving them, nor even holding them. What's so surprising? How many normal men feel comfortable alone with a bouquet? She knew this well, watching his discomfort in the hallway, yet still she teased him. "Oh, Simon, are these for me? or do you have another date after me? Too bad if they're not for me. They're stunning." He should have kept quiet instead of blurting out, "Yes, these are for you, your favourite red roses." And she, the tease, batted her eyelashes and replied, "Well, thank you, especially since I've always preferred white chrysanthemums." Honestly, even when they lived together, he didn't shower her with bouquets. He gave them to her on special occasions, like birthdays or Mother's Day. But this time it was from the heart, so to speak, and she, how could she? She should be more serious, more responsible. They're not kids anymore. This fact bothered Simon, as if reaching 45 marked the end of his youth. 45 years had passed so quickly. Half his life, if he's optimistic about his future. Doesn't Kelly understand this? She's only 3 years younger than him. She's not a young girl anymore, to put it mildly. Although objectively she looks good. No, she looks great. Very great. Why lie to himself? Kelly looks stunning. Honestly, yesterday he was at a loss for words and just stood there, staring at her. When he was getting ready to meet her, he imagined his ex-wife, whom he hadn't seen in over 2 years, as having gained weight, like many women in their 40s. He thought she would have given up on her appearance, especially since Kelly never cared much for fashion or clothes. He expected her to be in some baggy tracksuit, her hair tied back with an elastic band. Maybe she'd make a bit of an effort since he was coming over. She could impress him, at least out of pride. But no matter how hard Kelly would try, she couldn't turn back time. And then the door opened, and there she was, a stunning brunette, with dark hair cascading to her shoulders in stylish waves. She looked at him with sparkling brown eyes and smiled. He was taken aback, feeling a flush of heat at the sight of her smile. She had always been slim, as long as he could remember, and she moved with an energy that never seemed to fade. Even after having 3 children, her figure remained unchanged. Everyone said she became more beautiful with each pregnancy. He never paid much attention to such comments. People say that to all women, to be supportive. The worse a woman looks, the more compliments she gets, right? In any case, he never saw any particular beauty in his wife. Women rarely become more attractive with age, and Kelly always had an ordinary, unremarkable appearance, lacking brightness and originality. She never liked or knew how to use makeup, and had rather old-fashioned views on beauty. Even when they had money, and she could afford to improve her appearance, she refused to go to a plastic surgeon. She refused even to dye her hair, insisting she loved her natural dark hair colour. What's so great about that? She spent her life with plain black hair, like a raven. She lacked style, elegance and refinement, even after moving from the countryside 20 years ago. Over the years, he got used to her and stopped noticing it. Surprisingly, he couldn't even remember the length of her hair when they separated. Oh, where did her wrinkles go? He thought, looking at his stunning ex-wife. He remembered them well when they divorced. 3 distinct vertical wrinkles on her forehead between her eyebrows. She always joked rather foolishly that they were for each of her children, as if each had left a memento in the form of a wrinkle. It was a strange way to joke, instead of getting them smoothed out with an injection, as he had suggested many times. Ah, there they are, he thought to himself with relief, examining her face more closely. All her wrinkles are still there, and there are even new ones. Indeed, fine lines radiated from the corners of her eyes to her temples, and a telltale line had formed from the corner of her mouth downward. Yet, strangely, they were barely noticeable, and did not detract from her appearance at all. And those legs, where had they come from? Long, shapely and beautifully accentuated by her slim jeans. Her entire figure was remarkably well proportioned, so much so that he suddenly thought, if only all 3 of our girls took after Kelly, that would be wonderful. In short, Before him stood an astonishingly beautiful woman who seemed far younger than her actual age, especially considering all the children and problems she had experienced. Admitting this surprising revelation to himself, he looked at the woman again from under his eyelashes. Strangely, she hadn't changed much. At least, she hadn't done anything drastic to her appearance. Yet the impression she made was astonishing. She bloomed like a May rose, as if forgetting that she had long passed her 40s. "Kelly, is that you?" he blurted out, astonished. Even now he got ashamed, recalling her response to his foolish question. "And who were you expecting? Listen, maybe I misunderstood something and you arranged to meet someone else here. If so, I'll quickly tidy up and leave, don't worry." And then the most outrageous part began, their conversation. He had thought through every word so carefully, meticulously choosing and arranging each phrase. He even found himself mouthing the words in public, rehearsing what he would say to her. To himself he seemed so reasonable, wise and calm. His words were noble, fair and self-critical, yet he had no intention of humbling himself before Kelly, begging for anything, or asking for forgiveness. After all, what old scores could there be between people who had lived together for 15 years and had 3 grown daughters? "Kelly, you know, I've been thinking a lot about us," he began solemnly and meaningfully. "And I think that 3 years ago we made a mistake. You see? That decision to separate was wrong." "We made a mistake. Our decision," she echoed in surprise. "But you left me, kindly leaving me with the girls, debts and your sick mother and aunt. Do you really think that was my decision? And what do you mean by us now?" "Kelly, you know what I mean. Why are you nitpicking at words? I'm not talking about details, but in general." Simon felt the conversation veering off course. And why was she oversimplifying everything, blaming him? In reality, it had all been much more complex and tangled. "Kelly, I'm talking about us, about our feelings. You see? Yes, of course, I'm also to blame, but I've realised it all. And I think we need to stop looking for someone else to blame and just—" He looked up and suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Kelly was looking at him intently, but her eyes were laughing, and it wasn't a kind, modest, forgiving laugh suitable for a woman in this situation. It was a clear, malicious and mocking laughter. She was laughing at him. All his carefully chosen, thought-out and measured words and phrases were utterly useless. Kelly simply refused to listen to him, laughing and interrupting his solemn speech. "Simon, you're a clever one. You say all the right things, but it's too late. I'm no longer interested in any of this, you see?" "Not even a tiny bit. Let me explain it to you somehow. Remember when the girls were little? They would line up chairs, play train, and shout to each other. 'Dear passenger, you're late. Your train has left.' Well, Simon, your train has left too, a long time ago. So long ago that they've even removed the tracks." There was no point in continuing the conversation with this insensitive, unresponsive and, as it turned out, rather cruel woman, and Simon, trying to maintain his composure and keep his lips from trembling, looked at his ex-wife and sighed deeply. "Well, Kelly, I must admit I'm disappointed. Honestly, I expected a different reception. But it seems that over the years you've become more cruel and heartless. So be it." Truthfully, until the very end, he hoped that Kelly would suddenly shudder, sniffle and rush to him, saying, "Simon, dear, sweetheart, forgive me. I don't know what came over me. Of course, I'm happy you're back. Thank God you're back. We've been waiting for you, the girls and I, and we've been hoping." But what actually happened was quite different. Kelly paused for a moment, as if also realising the significance of the moment, and then delivered her parting words. "Simon, don't be offended, okay? As they say, To each his own. You cooked up this mess yourself. Now you have to eat it with a full spoon. That was particularly harsh. Only Kelly could remind him so sarcastically of his first and almost forgotten profession, although, if his life continues as it is, he might have to remember his plumbing skills and deal with sewage again. He left his former apartment, stiff as a board, went downstairs and headed to the bus stop. She's probably watching him now and laughing. Thank God none of the girls were home. Later he wandered aimlessly around his tiny room, trying to distract himself, but neither TV nor a magazine nor even a cigarette helped. All he could see was Kelly, infuriatingly beautiful and equally infuriatingly cheerful. He heard her silly and cruel words about the missed train, the mess he'd made, and the spoon he now had to eat it with. It seemed Kelly hadn't lost her village mannerisms and expressions. Let her sit there alone, biting her elbows, though she doesn't look like she's pining away. And she's not alone. It's he who is truly alone. After tossing and turning until midnight, he gave up on another restriction and downed half a glass of cognac, then lay down and after a couple more hours of restlessness, finally fell asleep. And as this morning showed, he might have been better off not waking up. Sinking into even deeper melancholy, he stared blankly out the window. If Simon had the superpower to see through space and walls and observe the one he was constantly thinking about, he would have been incredibly surprised. He would have seen her smiling, skipping around the apartment like a young girl, and occasionally bursting into utterly carefree laughter. Then Kelly would approach the mirror, look at her reflection and tap her forehead, still wearing that infuriating, light-hearted smile. In short, he would have noticed that she was content and inappropriately cheerful, especially considering their meeting the day before, a meeting between two former spouses who had been married for nearly 15 years. Yes, it had been 3 years since their separation, but is that enough time to forget everything and stop valuing all the good times they had? She really is an astonishingly heartless woman. Instead of being upset and thinking about what happened, she's practically dancing on one foot, singing loudly, despite never having a good voice, and even decided out of the blue to go buy new shoes. And then, perhaps he would have been even more confused. But since people can't see through distances, Simon sat alone with his thoughts, feeling a growing resentment toward this cruel, heartless, irresponsible woman who had simply disregarded his feelings and emotions. And one question kept pounding in his head, like a persistent woodpecker in a tree hollow. Why is she doing this to me? Why? Simon Alford was born into a small family that others, without much originality, called a matriarchy. In a small apartment lived 2 sisters, Teresa and Meredith, and their mother Harriet. The girl's father had died long ago from complications of a simple infection, and Harriet, widowed young, raised 2 girls alone, bitterly rejoicing that they were not boys. After all, dealing with 2 boys without a man in the family would have been, as she thought, beyond her capabilities. Harriet somehow managed to raise her daughters on her own, giving them health, education, and the guidelines in life. However, something must have been wrong with her upbringing, because neither Teresa nor Meredith found true happiness. The elder, Teresa, got married, stayed there for a while, and then, completely disillusioned, returned to her mother. She tucked away her management degree, ambitions, and hopes for a better future in the far corner of a cabinet and, without much thought, took a job as a salesperson in a clothes store. Meredith was much prettier and more cheerful than her sister, and their mother genuinely hoped that Meredith's life would turn out better than Teresa's. At first everything seemed to be going well. She enrolled in college, and in the middle of her studies she began a relationship with a classmate. This friendship grew so strong that Harriet, seeing her daughter return late from a date, decided to have a serious talk with her. "Meredith, I'm sorry to pry into your personal life, but are you sure your relationship with Alex is safe?" she asked. "Mum?" Meredith seemed shocked by her mother's tactlessness. "Have you lost your mind? This is my very personal life. Alex is a wonderful person, and I have a good head on my shoulders, even if you think otherwise. I just don't want you to suffer and cry and tell me you don't know what to do or how to live." Harriet quietly ended the pointless conversation, but 6 months later she heard, "Mum, I don't know what to do or how to live." The mother took a deep breath, mentally calculating her options for extra shifts at the hospital, and said, "Well, you have 2 choices, like any woman in your situation. Either you do something I can't even say out loud, and if you do, remember that I won't speak to you again, or you can have the baby. It's early, yes, but you won't be the first or the last. Since this is how life turned out, I won't refuse a grandson or a granddaughter. It seems to be my only hope for continuing the family line, although I hope it's a boy. I've realised I'm not a good parent for girls. Maybe I'll do better with a boy. Or does your wonderful man plan to raise the child himself?" Seeing the colour drain from her daughter's face, Harriet understood everything. "So, you haven't told him anything?" "Why? Why? Why? Because he doesn't want any of this. You know how he is. You've seen his family, his plans. He's planning to leave this place." Harriet couldn't understand how any of this excused the young man from his responsibilities. "You need to tell him you're pregnant," she said sternly to her daughter. "Or what? You won't speak to me?" Meredith asked sarcastically. "Not because you'll torment yourself for the rest of your life and be ashamed in front of your child for doing so," Harriet replied firmly. The woman never blamed anyone but herself for what happened to her daughters. She must have failed to do something important to protect Teresa, and especially Meredith, from rash decisions, from their naive trust in others' nobility. Or perhaps they were all just very unlucky in life. Meredith's boyfriend, unfortunately, was just another link in this chain of misfortune. Without a moment's hesitation, Alex suggested that Meredith deal with the situation quickly and radically, and then end their relationship. So, like her older sister, Meredith returned to her mother's care, but not alone. In due time she gave birth to a baby boy who, as if the heavens had finally heard Harriet's pleas, was born healthy and strong. "Thank God!" Harriet exclaimed, looking at the loudly crying, red-faced and healthy-looking baby boy. "At least there's a man in the house now." She had been a bit worried about how Meredith would be after the birth of her son. After all, Meredith had clearly been offended by her mother's ultimatum. She was disappointed in men in general, and in one man in particular. Often this disappointment manifested in rather bitter outbursts against her innocent mother. Who knows how she would behave? Would she be a good mother to the little one? Or would her past grievances and disappointments be more important? But from the first days after little Simon came home, Harriet's fears were dispelled. Meredith turned out to be not just a good and responsible mother, but almost obsessively so. She worried constantly about the baby, barely leaving his side, and if not for Harriet's strict supervision, she probably would never have put him down. Even when Simon was sleeping peacefully, Meredith would sit by his crib, gazing at his tiny face with a blissful smile. Every gesture, smile, sound, and new movement from him filled Meredith with awe. She watched him intently, holding her breath, and then spent hours recounting everything to her mother when she returned from her shift. "Mum, can you believe it? Simon lifted his head all by himself today and held it for a whole minute. Isn't that amazing? He's so advanced and strong, isn't he?" "Meredith, you might be surprised," Harriet replied with a smile, "but all babies his age do that. It's great, but there's nothing extraordinary or supernatural about it. It's normal." However, Meredith seemed categorically unwilling to apply the words normal and ordinary to her son. Everything he did, following the typical path of infant development, immediately became genius, amazing and astonishing. Even the bubbles of saliva and mucus that all babies blow were special when Simon did it. Teresa, for a long time, barely participated in the family life that had drastically changed with the arrival of the baby. She occasionally performed some minor tasks with a rather indifferent attitude, seemingly uninterested in the boy, treating him like a new piece of furniture. Teresa's heart has really hardened, Harriet thought bitterly. But one day as she opened the front door she heard, "Well, who do we have here looking so cute? Who's going to eat all this porridge and then go for a walk?" Has Meredith caught a cold or something? Her voice sounds strange, Harriet wondered. A minute later her surprise turned to astonishment, and she nearly lost her voice. Teresa was bent over a high chair where Simon sat, confidently smearing porridge across the tray with both hands as Teresa fed him. Teresa's usually stern and frowning face was softened by an expression of tenderness and joy, as if she herself didn't quite understand what was happening. But the fact remained, her tough exterior had cracked. A flood of unreleased and seemingly forever preserved auntie love poured out onto the boy. From that day on, Teresa and Meredith competed to care for Simon, vying for the chance to bathe him, feed him, take him for walks and sing lullabies. Harriet watched this sudden doubling of motherhood with a mix of irony and concern. "Remember, we're raising a boy," she tried to remind them. "We shouldn't spoil Simon too much." "Oh, Mum," Meredith would wave her off, with Teresa's full support. "Stop it! How can you spoil such a little one? And with what? It's not like we have the means. As for your strict male upbringing, he'll grow up and then we'll be strict. But for now we are going to play horsey." Harriet looked at her eldest daughter, ready and eager on all fours, shaking her head like a stallion, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. One good thing about the situation was that Teresa and Meredith, united by their shared adoration, had grown closer as sisters. Harriet couldn't remember the last time they had chatted so warmly. So they lived, working and raising Simon, despite Harriet's efforts to steer his upbringing in a different direction. Simon couldn't help but grow up spoiled. And not just spoiled, but convinced that the world existed solely to fulfill his desires and listen to his new ones. How else could a boy turn out, who, from about the age of 5, heard that he was the head of their family? That the title of head involved not only rights but also responsibilities was something no one bothered to tell Simon. By that time Harriet, exhausted from endless work, quietly passed away, leaving these parting words. "Meredith, don't be angry at what I'm about to say. We've already spoiled Simon, and there's nothing we can do about it. But at least try not to let him become what his father once did. Don't let him become a scoundrel." Meredith was horrified by her mother's words. How could anyone think such things about their boy? Could he even be compared to anyone, let alone the scoundrel who happened to be his father? Simon was growing into a real man, and if he wanted the best for himself, well, that was right. Her son deserved the best. Meredith was totally certain in that. But the best didn't seem to be falling at Simon's feet. He wasn't a bad student, but he lacked enthusiasm, and no one ever pushed him to do better. He made friends, lost keys and notebooks, rode his bike, kicked a football in the courtyard, pulled girls' pigtails at school, admired the neighbour's dog, feared the school janitor, and yearned to explore the wonderful world of boyish secrets behind the garages. In short, he was a typical, normal teenager. But one thing set him apart from his peers, an as yet unconscious sense of power over women. For now, he only had power over the two women living with him in the same apartment, his mother and his aunt. But this power was real and undeniable, and who said he wouldn't be able to extend it in the future to other members of the fairer sex, at least to those who interested him? Especially since he had the looks for it. Not a movie star, of course, but if rumours and glances were to be believed, he was far from being at the bottom of the schoolgirls' rankings. In fact, he was among the leaders. Simon could intend be grateful for his appearance to his mother and unknown father. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and preferred not to cut his hair, after realising that glances with a lock of hair falling over his forehead had a much stronger effect on people, especially women, than a simple, straightforward look. After watching a movie with an actor who was the idol of his classmate, and whom he slightly resembled according to some remarks, Simon adopted the habit of smiling mysteriously and slightly squinting. However, this last habit sent his mother and aunt into a panic, as they suddenly thought Simon had vision problems, and it took him a lot of effort to convince them that he was fine. The last grade crept up unexpectedly. Suddenly it became clear that Simon Alford had neither good grades, talents, nor any specific knowledge, and surprisingly, neither his natural charm nor his good looks could help him get into college. This was the first serious setback in Simon's life. He suddenly didn't get what he wanted. All his classmates, the boys worth befriending, went on to further education, but he, the magnificent Simon, was left with no idea what to do next. "At your mercy, I can't go to college because we don't have any money." "Fine, then I'll go to be a plumber." "And you should be ashamed of yourselves," Simon said to his mother and aunt, in a fit of anger at the whole world. And to Meredith and Teresa's horror, Simon really did apply to vocational school to become a plumber. "Simon," Meredith pleaded, "but it's so dirty and smelly." "It doesn't just smell, it stinks," Simon replied grimly. "Well, if there's no money for a clean and prestigious education, then I'll learn where it's free and dirty." Speaking gloomily about the hardships of his future profession, Simon was being quite deceitful. His choice was difficult, but not entirely selfless. In reality, despite its aroma, the profession of a plumber held many promising prospects for Simon, as hard as it was for Teresa and Meredith to believe. And the main proof of this was their neighbour Todd, the plumber. He was a cheerful, kind-hearted man who, having no children of his own, welcomed the neighbourhood kids with kind words and life advice. And most importantly, he seemed to have money. Maybe not a lot, not a fortune, but real money. At least in his spare time, which he had plenty of. Todd wore great sneakers, brand-name sportswear, drank expensive beer without worrying about the time, and most surprisingly, drove a nice car that seemed luxurious to the inexperienced Simon. And Simon thought, why not? Todd also confirmed the rightness of his choice, patting him on the shoulder and saying, "That's right, go study. Although in our line of work brains aren't the most important thing. People's pipes and faucets will leak and burst as long as they live on this earth. You, Simon, will always have your bread and butter. But what you put on top of that butter will be up to you. And your looks, well, let's just say, in our plumbing business, you can reach great heights." Simon didn't fully understand the words of his not-so-sober neighbour at the time, but later, in vocational school, he often heard things like, "Simon, are you going to take a wrench on your cause, or do you plan to manage without it?" He brushed off the jokes, but secretly relied on his masculine charm and attractiveness. After graduating, Simon began his working life, which turned out to be much harder, dirtier and smellier than he had imagined. The district where he lived and worked was old. The houses were built many years ago and showed their age. The pipes he tirelessly repaired and replaced stubbornly started leaking and bursting in new places. Soon Simon felt like his entire life had turned into one giant pipe, constantly dripping water and, with it, his years and youth. Moreover, the residents of the apartments in the buildings he serviced were all old and stingy, so the serious earnings that the unforgettable Todd had once inspired him with were not materializing. "Simon, maybe you should leave this awful job," his mother would ask plaintively, carefully picking up the dirty overalls he had tossed on the floor. "And who will feed me, you or Auntie?" he would retort. "There's no point in discussing it now. You didn't let me get a proper education. Now deal with it." After such exchanges, his mother would feel guilty and fall silent for a long time. Simon would lie down on the old sofa and thoroughly pity himself. Life was clearly taking him in the wrong direction, and he lacked the desire, strength and skill to turn it around. He didn't want to go on that particular call. He had been to the apartment where water was gushing from the pipes many times before, and the annoying old lady who lived there couldn't understand that his patches on the rusty pipes were as useful as a bandage on a corpse. She demanded a replacement but refused to pay for it. In short, he already hated his upcoming visit to the tiresome apartment. With an expression of regret and fatigue, he rang the doorbell and froze in astonishment. Instead of the familiar, perpetually disgusted face that resembled a baked apple, a young girl's face greeted him with an open smile. The girl was grinning as if she had come not to fix an old smelly rusty pipe, but to give her an incredible gift, starting with a bouquet of fresh flowers, which he was supposedly holding instead of his old, greasy, shapeless tool bag. "Oh, hello," the girl said with suspicious enthusiasm. "And who are you?" "The groom," Simon muttered, slightly annoyed. The girl burst into laughter, loud and genuine, as if he had said something incredibly funny and witty. "What a silly girl you are. Why are you laughing?" Simon thought to himself, still irritated. "Don't mind me," the girl waved her hand, wiping away tears of laughter. "It's just that I was told there's a superstition. If the first person you meet in a new place is a man, it brings good luck. And here you are, not just any man, but a groom." "Oh, I don't know. Usually a plumber means trouble," Simon unexpectedly joked. He suddenly wanted the girl to stay and keep laughing. As he pondered these strange feelings, his old acquaintance, the apartment owner, rushed out of the bathroom. "Look at him! Water's gushing out and he's flirting with a girl. And you, Kelly, don't distract the man. Let Simon get to work." That's how, with any effort, they met. Kelly had recently arrived in the city from some remote village to study at the university and was temporarily staying with her relative, the apartment owner. She had barely managed to leave home. Her parents didn't want to let her go, which was understandable. They had a stud farm and a large household, with 2 brothers and a sister, or maybe 2 sisters and a brother. He didn't quite catch that. Anyway, it didn't matter. Clearly Kelly's parents were very fertile and loved children, and Kelly was their eldest. She would only have to smile with her relative for a couple of weeks because she was moving into her grandmother's apartment. It was just undergoing renovation. Kelly's grandmother, her father's mother, had left the apartment to her favourite granddaughter, specifically so she could study without worrying about housing. She had already been accepted into the economics faculty, which was no surprise. After all, she had graduated from high school, albeit a rural one, with honours, and had won every academic competition. She also had a gymnastics ranking, had studied at an art school, volunteered at a festival. The only thing she couldn't do was sing. She had neither the voice nor the ear for it. It was a shame because sometimes she felt an overwhelming urge to sing, but she sang anyway, even though her father laughed at her, and Alf, their spaniel, always joined in with his howling. To his amazement, Simon knew all of this by the time he finished fixing the pipes. He couldn't recall if he had asked any questions, or if the information had just flowed out of the girl like water from his hated pipes, but as he left the apartment, he realised they were no longer strangers. As they said goodbye, he found himself saying something he had never said before. "Listen, maybe we could go out sometime? Just the two of us. Tomorrow, for example. I could show you around the city." He braced himself for her response, expecting her to say, "No way, you're just a sewer leech," or something along those lines. Or maybe she would just smile politely and say, "No, I'm sorry, I completely forgot. I have so much to do tomorrow, and the day after I'm leaving, and besides, I can find someone more decent to show me around the city." But instead, the girl looked up at him with her big grey eyes and a wide smile. "Oh, are you serious? That would be great. Thank you, I'd love to." Later, back at home, he thought about what had happened. Why should he be interested in some village girl, even if she did have her own apartment? She was simple, naive, and had managed to tell him her entire life story in just 10 minutes. And she dressed plainly. In short, there was nothing special about her. And then he imagined Kelly again, petite, slender, and so well-proportioned that it didn't matter what she wore. He pictured her face with her lips with a smile on them, her dark hair and grey eyes. In principle, yes, there was nothing special about her either, but he couldn't help but smile, and he eagerly watched the clock, willing the hands to move faster, so that this now unnecessary day would end and tomorrow would come. They met, and once again he was filled with an inexplicable sense of joy and excitement, as if Kelly was radiating invisible rays of happiness. He noticed again that she wasn't a classic beauty and didn't wear much makeup, although it seemed she had put on some gloss on her lips. Yes, it was pleasant to look at her, but even more pleasant was the feeling of her attentive and admiring gaze on him. No one had looked at him like that in a long time. He felt young and eager, ready to live, to do something, to move forward, and finally show the world that Simon Alford was. "Why don't you continue your studies?" she asked him on their second or third meeting. "These days you can't get anywhere without a good education." "Oh, I'm sorry," she added quickly. "I didn't mean to offend you." "You didn't offend me," Simon lied, feeling a pang of resentment. "I know I can't spend my whole life messing around with pipes." "Oh, don't say that," she protested. "You do important work. People can't live without you. You're more useful than most specialists with diplomas. Just look at my relative," Kelly laughed. "She can't go a day without mentioning you." Saying this, Kelly quickly turned serious again, or as serious as she could be. "It's just that I don't think you're pleased with it. You want something more, don't you?" "Well, yes," he admitted. "I'd like to go to college, maybe study engineering, but I can't. I'm terrible at algebra and physics, and besides, I hate studying. To be honest, I'd like to start my own business. I have this great idea." A minute later, he was enthusiastically explaining his grand plan for a company that would provide all necessary household and repair services. "That's amazing," Kelly exclaimed. "But you'd need a lot of money for that." "That's amazing," Kelly exclaimed. "But you need a lot of money for that," Simon argued. "Oh, you should never stop dreaming," she smiled. "Don't forget your dreams and desires, and they will come true." Never in his life had Simon felt so confident as he did with Kelly. For the first time he felt like a real man, not just pretending to be one. She looked at him with respect and even admiration. Soon Kelly moved into her apartment, started university and began seeing Simon. His mother liked her immediately and wholeheartedly. "She's a wonderful girl, simply amazing," she said, her eyes shining. Simon was taken aback by such a quick conclusion. Knowing his mother and her pathological attachment to him, he expected jealousy, criticism and nitpicking, all the things that stories about mother-in-laws and daughter-in-law warn about. But it turned out quite the opposite, probably because he, Simon, couldn't have chosen an unworthy girl. Most likely that was it. Indeed, it wasn't about Kelly being so wonderful. 6 months later they got married. Simon was overwhelmed by meeting Kelly's large and boisterous family, who nearly trampled his mother and Aunt Teresa in their joy at the wedding. The only thing that reconciled him to this invasion was that Kelly's father had brought them a substantial sum of money and a brand new car as a gift. Despite her rural background, Kelly turned out to be an exceptionally brilliant student. She graduated from university early and, having tossed her naturally read diploma aside, sat down across from Simon. "Well, shall we make your dreams come true?" she declared. "What dreams?" he asked, startled. "You know, the firm, the services, remember? Look, I've already drawn up a business plan. I've worked out the budget, made estimates for the client base. By the way, there are several housing that need exactly these services. Here are all the phone numbers. Of course, we'll need money, but we can borrow from my family at a reasonable rate. Anyway, I'll handle the finances and accounting. I've also found a lawyer. You just need to put together a team." Simon looked at Kelly in alarm. "Wait, Kelly, not so fast. We need to think this through." "It's not too fast. And besides, we need to hurry up and make some money because... She suddenly stumbled, which was unlike her. "Why?" he asked, looking up at her. "Because we're going to have a baby soon," Kelly smiled. Simon didn't even notice when they had a little girl. Their life didn't change much, although he had been told that his wife should become slower and calmer during this period. But Kelly seemed to defy all the rules, and she gave birth to her first daughter almost without taking a break from her work. Somewhere between financial reports and rushed visits to the hospital to see her suddenly ill mother-in-law. Surprisingly, the business was going well. Over a few years, they assembled a strong team of craftsmen. The repair and installation services they provided were quick and high quality. They offered full guarantees on their work, and if any problems arose, everything was fixed instantly, without questions or complaints. They started making good money, then serious money, which allowed them to move to a larger apartment. "Well, that's good, because we need more space," Kelly declared. "Why?" Simon asked, feeling a sense of déjà vu. "Because we're having a second child," she announced. A few months later, their second daughter was born. Kelly didn't slow down in her work, affairs, relationships, or, as it turned out, childbearing. When the eldest daughter turned 5, she suddenly looked down and, uncharacteristically shy, glanced at her husband. "So," he shuddered, "do we need a bigger apartment again?" "Well, yes," she nodded. "Kelly, 3 is too many," Simon exclaimed in fear. "Oh, come on, Simon. 3? That's just 1 more than 2. And besides..." Kelly had fully recovered and laughed in her usual style. "I promise you, this is the last child and the last apartment. Then we'll build a house." The third baby was also a girl. The girls were all alike, strong, pretty, dark-haired and brown-eyed. They grew up as if competing over who spoke more words at a year old, who walked first, or who learned to read first. Kelly still managed everything, working, cooking, ironing his shirts, and singing in her terrible, completely off-key voice, as if the number of children truly made no difference to her. And suddenly Simon felt bored and resentful. Here he was in his 5th decade, a family man, a successful businessman, yet he still felt like he was under someone's thumb. And his friends' jokes about being the head of a woman's republic had recently started to sound offensive, as if they said head ironically, meaning something entirely different. And of course it was all Kelly's fault, who had apparently completely forgotten who the real head of the household was. "You've destroyed the man in me," Simon told Kelly. "A man should be strong and independent. He should be the head of the family, the provider and the protector." "So?" Kelly said, surprised. "What part of that bothers you?" "Everything," he declared. "I don't make any decisions. For some reason, I always have to consult. But you do whatever you want. You even had children without my opinion. And I'm tired of all this noise and commotion. I can't even sit quietly in my own home. And your pancakes. In short, I want a divorce," Simon declared, trying to sound manly and independent. "You know what? That's not such a bad idea," Kelly replied thoughtfully, as if she had seen something new and surprising. "To be honest, I'm tired of all this too. I agree. Leave." He was shocked by her compliance. He had expected hysteria, misunderstandings, shoutings and pleading. But Kelly surprised him again, even after 15 years together. "But why should I be the one to leave? Why do you get to keep everything? The apartment, the kids?" Simon blurted out. "Yes, why indeed?" Kelly retorted. "It's not fair. You should get everything, of course. The kids and the apartment that comes with them. How many of the girls will you take? 1? 2? Oh, wait, you're a hero, so you're taking all 3. Fine, so it's settled. You stay here, and I'll leave you and pay you alimony." Simon looked at his wife in panic. Was she serious? Of course he loved his daughters, but the thought of being solely responsible for them, thinking only about their needs and the household, was overwhelming. Lessons, braids, illnesses, activities, lunches, dinners, dresses, boots, pillows, dishes, books, cutlets. All these responsibilities flooded his mind, and he staggered as if Kelly had already left, and he was alone with his girls and all their problems. "Wait, Kelly, we can't do like this," he stammered in fear. "Oh, relax, I was just kidding," Kelly chuckled. "For a moment it seemed like there was a real man in you." And so he left, feeling free for the first time in years. Kelly handed over the company to him. They agreed on alimony, and they went their separate ways. At first everything seemed fine. He found a new woman, nothing like Kelly with her sturdy figure. She was beautiful, with luscious curls, long shiny nails, perfectly made-up eyes, and full bright lips. Her figure was stunning. He took her on tropical vacations, bought her expensive jewellery, but then everything started to fall apart. It turned out that Kelly had been the driving force behind their company. She found clients, negotiated the best contracts, sourced materials, and handled the accounting. Without her, the company struggled and eventually collapsed, leaving him with debts and problems. Within a year, he had spent all his money and sold his car. He remembered his mother, or rather, the apartment she owned, and returned home. Meredith and Teresa were surprisingly healthy and well off. They had new cosy robes, a fridge full of food, and a large plasma TV playing soap operas. "Kelly visits all the time, and the girls come over too," Meredith said, looking at her son with a new, unfamiliar, strange gaze. "Your room is free if you need it." But he couldn't stay long. It was too painful to see his mother and aunt with their newfound strength. He rented a small apartment and realized that he wanted to get his life back, his prosperity, confidence, daughters, his mother's proud gaze, and Kelly, of course. He could get it all back. It was up to him. He was a man. He was Simon Alford. That was his plan until yesterday. And this morning, Simon was still sitting over the ruined eggs and thinking about the unfairness of life and the cruelty of women in particular. "Your train has left," he remembered Kelly's words. She was his wife, the mother of his children. But how could she do this to him? How? The cheerful screams of the girls, the smell of fresh pancakes, and his mother's voice calling him "dear," echoed in his mind. But it was just a mirage.